When Hitler became dictator of Germany, he applied what he wrote in his book, Mein Kampf. A stronger race will drive out the weak races, for the vital urge crushes the weak, to make room for the strong. How did Hitler manage to take power and become the supreme leader, the Führer? Nuremberg, 1929. The Nazi Party Congress is the real beginning of what German playwright Bertolt Brecht will call the resistible rise of Adolf Hitler. The devastating new economic crisis originating in the United States has caused havoc throughout the world, particularly in Germany. One after the other, factories close their doors, and the number of unemployed reaches the astounding figure of 6 million. Out of despair, many Germans turn to the Nazis, or to the communists, who also have their paramilitary troops, complete with uniforms. Communists and Nazis clash violently in all the elections that follow. Hitler provokes disorder, while at the same time claiming to be the only man capable of stopping it. This tactic of blackmail proves effective. Hitler rallies the small business owners and homeowners to his cause by denouncing the threat of the Red Plague, the egalitarian Marxists. The result is astonishing. Hitler is now the leader of the country's second political party, after the Social Democrats. Yet the upper classes, who despise Hitler, aren't particularly worried. Stefan Zweig wrote, "To them, power had always been the reserve of the barons, the princes, and those with a university education. Nothing blinded the German intellectuals as much as pride in their culture." And in the meantime, Hitler's rise continues. In just a year, he comes to dominate the extreme right in Germany. Veterans associations, such as the Steel Helmets, with 500,000 members, will have to obey his orders. Behind his domineering posturing, Hitler has just emerged from a scandal which might have finished him. Rumors of a personal drama circulate in the press. He had conceived a passion for his own niece, Geli Hobal, aged 23. He loved her irrationally, possessively. She has just committed suicide. She was living with him in his Munich apartment. She confided to a friend, "My uncle is a monster. No one could imagine what he demands of me." She wanted to leave him, and now she is dead. A press campaign is launched against him, accusing him of sexual perversion and even of having Geli murdered. Extremely depressed, Hitler threatens to kill himself as well. His worried entourage decides to act. His photographer, Heinrich Hoffmann, introduced him to one of his secretaries. She resembles Geli. Her name is Eva Braun. And already quite worldly, she fits the bill. She's captivated by the Nazi Party leader's popularity. Hitler will make her his new shadow mistress. He declares himself a bachelor married to Germany to gain the sympathy of female voters. At her side, Hitler recovers his combativeness as a political animal at a time when the end of the mandate of Germany's President Hindenburg is drawing near. Hitler is among the candidates to succeed him in 1932. Hardly 10 years after his attempted putsch and incarceration, Hitler is on the verge of becoming president of Germany. Germans are subjected to an intensive poster campaign. Nazi propaganda chief Joseph Goebbels devises an ultra-modern election campaign using airplanes, a European first. The largest commercial plane of the time is provided by the director of Lufthansa Airlines, who isn't adverse to this free advertising opportunity. Hitler, wearing a leather helmet, sets off on a tour of some 100 German towns where he can gauge his popularity. His pilot, Hans Bauer, recalled, "We flew in all kinds of weather, even in storms. Canceling a rally was out of the question. People ended by losing their fear of flying." Hans Bauer's conclusion? Hitler contributed to the expansion of air traffic. Goebbels invents the slogan, "The Führer above Germany." He forges the myth of Hitler the Supreme Savior during these aerial hustings, carefully filmed and then projected all over the country. But Goebbels cannot relax yet. The campaign costs a lot, and the industrial barons are still wary of Hitler's violent methods. The Nazis must charge everyone who comes to listen to Hitler the equivalent of €1. This doesn't discourage them. On the contrary. A witness, von Spaun, describes his reaction. "I suddenly felt Hitler's eyes on me, and it affected me for the rest of my life." A week before the presidential elections, Hitler brings together 100,000 Berliners, sick of the traditional parties, who seem incapable of facing the crisis. 20-year-old Jutta Rüdiger is in the crowd. "I can't explain the state that unemployment plunged us into. We really thought that Hitler alone could get us out of that misery."
Sie reden nicht von den Zehntausenden, die Jahr für Jahr den Gashahn aufdrehen, nicht weil es ihnen zu gut geht.
With his pseudo-social discourse, Hitler becomes a serious candidate for the presidency. The press have a field day. On the right, Hitler is seen as the prototype of the political adventurer. On the left, the insults are more personal. Hitler is described as a pansy, a half-mad cheater, a vain charlatan, a fake tough guy with a rhinoceros hide riding crop. The outgoing president, Marshal Hindenburg, although a reactionary monarchist, is supported by the left. This paradox reflects the growing danger of Hitler's rise, as is hammered home by his most determined opponent, Social Democrat leader Otto Wels.
Es ist keine Minute Zeit mehr zu verlieren. Nur einen Gedanken, ein Ziel kann es noch geben. Der Faschismus muss geschlagen werden bis zur Vernichtung. Arbeit und durch für die Freiheit, die Republik und die deutsche Arbeit.
April 10, 1932, the verdict is announced. Hitler will not be president. 13 million Germans have voted for him, a third of the electorate. It is enormous, but it isn't enough. Hindenburg, re-elected thanks to the Social Democrats, wants to be free of his dependence on them. And Hitler, continuing his resistible rise, starts campaigning again. As he gives 5 speeches a day, his entourage is reeling. One of his intimates says, "We were like seconds who have to get their boxer back into shape between rounds." But Hitler feeds off the crowds. He's carried away by his own virulence.
Die Gegner werfen uns Nationalsozialisten vor und mir insbesondere, dass wir intolerante, unverträgliche Menschen seien. Wir wollten, sagen sie, mit anderen Parteien nicht arbeiten. Die Herren haben ganz recht. Wir sind intolerant. Ich habe mir ein Ziel gestellt, nämlich die 30 Parteien aus Deutschland hinauszufegen.
For Hitler, the first party to eliminate in the 1932 election campaign is the Communist Party. The stormtroopers are given the task. They are now 400,000 strong. They finance themselves, paying for their own uniforms and equipment. One of them, Wolf Teubert, works in a delicatessen in Hamburg. He is ready to join his motorized unit at a moment's notice. He states, "I had only one thought, to risk my life for Germany." The humiliation of the Treaty of Versailles had made me a passionate defender of Hitler. There was companionship, solidarity, and pride in wearing a uniform. We, who were ashamed of having been too young to have fought in the Great War, took advantage of our elders' experience. July 1932, the bloody summer of the election campaign. The SA stormtroopers, with the complicity of the police, provoke street battles with the communists. 100 dead and 1,000 wounded is the toll among the communists. Many Germans, exhausted by the disorder and the government's powerlessness, approve of the Nazis' violent acts. The result? 230 Nazis elected to parliament. Hitler is now head of the country's strongest political party. Power is within his reach for the first time. Quickly, however, euphoria gives way to disappointment. President Hindenburg refuses to name him chancellor, head of the government. Hindenburg tells Hitler, "Before God, my conscience, and the fatherland, I cannot hand over power to a party as intolerant as yours." Nevertheless, Hindenburg offers him a role in the government. But Hitler doesn't consider himself an ordinary politician seeking a ministerial position. He wants all the power to establish a totalitarian state. In a few weeks, Goebbels, the head of the vast Nazi parliamentary group, succeeds in paralyzing democratic procedure. No majority can be formed. Now, Goebbels announces, "It's high time to dissolve this assembly, which no longer reflects the will of the people." Another election has to be called, the third within a year. It will take place in November. Hitler sees it as another chance to make gains.
Die Energie und die Zähigkeit gehabt, von den damaligen 1000 Mann vor 10 Jahren bis heute 14 Millionen zu machen. Und ich werde aus den 14 Millionen die 20 und die 30 Millionen machen.
The election's results are a crushing disappointment for Hitler. Surrounded by his personal SS guards, he broods over his failure. He has lost 2 million voters. Goebbels says, "We've had a setback. Hitler refused to enter the government, and the voters didn't understand why." With bitterness, Goebbels reads the foreign press reports. The London Daily Herald writes, "Hitlerism as a political force is dead." The French daily, Le Populaire, edited by eminent socialist Léon Blum, headlines an article, "The End of Hitler." But no. 3 months later, Hindenburg, still facing the impossibility of forming a majority, finally names Hitler Chancellor of Germany. A student in Berlin, Sebastian Hafner, writes, "I've just heard the news. I'm frozen with terror. For an instant, I can physically smell blood and mud. I see something dangerous, like the big, dirty paw of a predatory animal raking its claws over my face." To achieve his end, the wolf disguises himself as a lamb. Hitler reassures Hindenburg by asking for only 2 ministerial portfolios for the Nazis. The Minister of the Interior would be a Munich policeman named Wilhelm Frick, with Hermann Göring at his side, also to control the police, 2 key positions. Hitler advances by subterfuge. His aim is to show that the most important ministerial positions have gone to a conservative, Franz von Papen, a former chancellor, and to the strong man of the extreme right, Alfred Hugenberg, Minister of the Economy and Agriculture, an aggressive and authoritarian hardliner. Hitler calls his government the Cabinet of National Concentration to make it sound like a nationalist coalition rather than a predominantly Nazi government. This very reactionary body believes it can control Hitler. Von Papen makes a costly mistake when he says to Hugenberg, "Hitler is our man," to which Hugenberg replies, "We oversee him." That very evening, January 30th, 1933, in Berlin and all the other large German cities, Goebbels organizes a torchlight parade of the Steel Helmet Veteran Group, the SS, and prominently, the SA Stormtroopers. Goebbels declares that 1 million people marched in the parade, but the British military attaché estimates them at less than 15,000 marchers, made to go around in circles for hours by Goebbels. They pass under the windows of the 85-year-old President Hindenburg, who, believing himself in Verdun in 1916, says to his aide, "Our men are parading well. They've taken many prisoners." Hitler, at the Chancellery, receives a frenzied tribute. Louise Solmitz, a Berlin schoolteacher, says, "It was drunkenness without wine." She adds, "I heard people shouting, 'Death to the Jews! Jewish blood will gush under the knife.'" Goebbels concludes, "It's like a fairy tale." At the Berlin Sports Palace, Hitler delivers his first speech as Chancellor. What is Hitler's plan? Absolute power, but by stages. There are still 200 communists and social democrats in the Reichstag. Therefore, Hitler's first move is to dissolve parliament and call new elections. His speech, broadcast on radio, is an appeal to all voters, even those on the left.
Und hege felsenfest die Überzeugung, dass eben doch dann einmal die Stunde kommt, in der die Millionen, die uns heute verfluchen,
hinter uns stehen und mit uns begrüßen werden dann das gemeinsam geschaffene, wiedererkämpfte, bitter erworbene, neue deutsche Reich der Größe und der Ehre und der Kraft und der Herrlichkeit.
With this relatively conciliatory speech, Hitler continues to advance wearing a mask. Goebbels, however, wants to clarify matters by returning to the fundamentals, anti-Semitism and violence, for the Nazi voter base.
Und wenn die jüdischen Zeitungen heute glauben, auf versteckte Drohungen die nationalsozialistische Bewegung einschüchtern zu können, sie sollen sich hüten. Einmal wird unsere Geduld zu Ende sein und dann wird den Juden das freche Lügenmaul gestopft werden. Im Übrigen können unsere Parteigenossen und SA-Männer auch darüber beruhigt sein, dass eher als wir alle denken, die Stunde des Endes des roten Terrors gekommen sein wird. Und wir werden den Herren vom Karl-Liebknecht-Haus bald Töne beibringen, die sie noch niemals vernommen haben.
Only 2 weeks later in Berlin, the Great Reichstag, the German parliament building, burns down in the night. Nothing remains of this powerful symbol of German democracy. The investigation carried out by the police under Göring incriminates a 24-year-old Dutch communist named Marinus van der Lubbe, suspected of a heavy record of arson. Quickly found guilty, he is guillotined. Who will profit from this crime? The Nazis. Hitler and Göring raised the specter of a red plot. Göring has 4,000 communists arrested, including the leaders. But the Communist Party isn't outlawed yet. For Hitler wishes to maintain the appearance of legality for the legislative elections, which he expects will consolidate his power. The Germans, fed up with election campaigns and disorder, see renewed action by the stormtroopers throughout the country to protect the population from communist attacks, as the Nazis put it. Stormtroopers, now armed, have the status of auxiliary police officers. All over Germany, they take up positions in front of the headquarters of leftist parties and workers' unions. Again, they will foment violence, while Hitler continues to play the electoral card to reassure an increasingly exhausted President Hindenburg. Göring, in his Gothic-style armchair, fingering his dagger, gives his doctored version of the election outcome.
Der 5. März bedeutet für einen Mann und eine Bewegung einen gewaltigen Sieg. Der Sieger des 5. heißt Adolf Hitler und die Bewegung ist der Nationalsozialismus. Beides aber ist gleichzusetzen mit dem deutschen Volke und dem Deutschen Reich.
In reality, Hitler and his coalition barely win a majority. Even with all his propaganda and the intimidation by the SA, Hitler hasn't stopped the communists from obtaining 12% of the votes. He invalidates the election of the communist parliamentarians and has them arrested and sent to the concentration camps of Oranienburg near Berlin and Dachau near Munich, which have just been set up by the Nazis. These are the first camps that opened in the year 1933 alone. The number of political prisoners rises during the first months of the regime. Communist student Klaus Bastian recalls, "The guards whipped the prisoners and pushed us into freezing water. We always feared for our lives, night and day." The Nazi version is that these parliamentarians, senior civil servants, and union leaders are being re-educated. The baleful shadow of dictatorship spreads over Germany. Since the Reichstag has burned, Hitler stages the new parliament in the Royal Opera House, surrounded by the SA, and demands unlimited powers. The communist members are gone, most of them to the camps. The 94 Social Democrats who are still present will summon the courage to vote against Hitler. They too will be arrested and sent to the camps, or forced to flee the country. 441 members from the extreme right to the Catholic center listened to Hitler's long, rambling speech intended to bolster the people's illusions. As always, he promises the earth, the end of unemployment, relief for peasant farmers, respect for the law, and above all, peace. The assembly votes its own demise by granting Hitler full powers for 4 years. No longer can President Hindenburg contest the Chancellor's decisions. To the sound of cheers, democracy dies in Germany. The fact that Hitler, whose power is based on anti-Semitism, now leads one of the world's most advanced industrialized countries, is seen as a threat. All over the world, anti-Hitler demonstrations, like this one in New York, protest against his barbarity, his obscurantism, and his anti-Semitism. All call for a worldwide boycott of German products. To dissuade them, Hitler orders a day-long boycott of Jewish-owned stores in Germany, meant as a warning. Jews in Germany are horrified to see essay posters that read, "Not a penny for Jewish capitalism, buy German," and "The Jews are the cause of our downfall." It's the beginning of the persecution. Edwin Landau, owner of a large store in East Prussia, writes, before emigrating to Palestine with his family, "I changed completely in the space of a few hours. This country and this people whom I had respected and loved until then had suddenly become my enemies. I was no longer German, or no longer had the right to be German. I was ashamed of having once belonged to that nation. I was ashamed of the trust I had held in so many people who now removed their masks to reveal themselves as my enemies." Anti-Semitism had contaminated the universities. Nazism is perverting people's minds, turning them against modern culture, imposing an intolerant sectarian ideology that will lead the students themselves to burn books. French socialist leader Léon Blum wrote, "What was needed in Germany was for the communists and the Social Democrats to fight together." But the Social Democrats were unwilling, and as for the communists, Moscow had given them their orders: no alliance with the Social Democrats, described as socio-traitors. Stalin's suicidal orders were a gift to Hitler. Hitler suppressed the unions, Now he outlaws the Social Democratic Party.
Das alles ist Halt! Die große Zeit ist jetzt angebrochen. Deutschland ist nun erwacht. Die Macht haben wir nun in Deutschland gewonnen. Nun gilt es, das deutsche Volk zu gewinnen.
The German people, for their part, can go on vacation. Henceforth, the Nazi Party is the only legal party. Its anti-Semitic slogans don't seem to stir many people up. They are largely indifferent to the fate of their Jewish compatriots, who, after all, only number 500,000, less than 1% of the population. Half the German Jews would manage to emigrate. Gerda Blackman remembers, "We succeeded in embarking on the condition of giving up everything we owned." The poorer German Jews would be stuck in Germany. They would be deported to the eastern ghettos, then exterminated in the camps. Opponents to the regime would flee, if they can, anywhere they can, especially to France, where they would later be trapped by the German occupation in the war and handed over to the Nazis. Many of those who cannot leave in time or who choose to stay to carry on the struggle would be captured and martyred in the camps. The majority of Germans would accept the totalitarian regime. Some would begin the day by hoisting the swastika flag, Germany's official emblem. The others, now that Hitler had muzzled the press, would read only Nazi newspapers. Their daughters, too, would learn the compulsory salute. Their sons would enter the Hitler Jugend, the Hitler Youth Movement, which will hone their aggressive tendencies. At school, teachers would show pupils how to handle weapons. Teachers would have to use down-to-earth, Nazi-sanctioned examples in math class, such as, how much does a pupil cost? A mentally handicapped young person costs the state 1,800 marks a year, the average pupil 320 marks, and a brilliant pupil only 125 marks. Answer: society can only survive if its citizens are genetically sound. The older daughters would join the BDM, the Bund Deutscher Mädel, the League of German Girls. It trained girls to be good wives and to bear many little soldiers. These would be killed in the last combat actions in Berlin. However, the Germans are unaware of all this in the summer of 1933. Hitler is not yet the unchallenged supreme leader. To achieve this, he must continue his propaganda, such as the film Victory of Faith, that depicts the first Congress since the taking of power by the Nazi Party, now the only party. Hitler is well served by the talent of the young director Leni Riefenstahl, who charms him with her energy and beauty. With clever framing and lighting techniques, she glorifies the new god of a new mystique, a mystique of race, of the leader, of power and its apostles. Like the most loyal of the loyal, Rudolf Hess, one of the writers of the anti-Jewish laws. Like Joseph Goebbels, under whom propaganda has become an important ministry. Like Hermann Goering, who will resuscitate German aviation. And like Ernst Röhm, head of that horde of fanatics, the stormtroopers. Nothing gives cause to suspect that this film would be banned a year later, because Röhm, even though he has been Hitler's accomplice since the failed putsch of 1923, will be denounced as a traitor. Perhaps because he is too close to Hitler, or because the SA is too big. It is a force that rivals the army. Hitler, to gain the army's support, will bring them into line and eliminate Röhm. It all begins the next summer when Hitler travels to Italy to meet Mussolini in Venice. Hitler is impressed by his elder counterpart, his role model. He's seeking Mussolini's approval for his plan to annex Austria. Mussolini refuses. He doesn't want Germans gathering on his borders. He doesn't warm to Hitler, saying, "He makes me think of a talkative monk." He takes him on a tour of Venice, pointedly starting with his battleship fleet, while Hitler has no naval force. Hitler returns to Berlin, mortified. He understands now that until he rebuilds the armed forces, he won't be able to carry out his plans. Hitler goes to observe the maneuvers of the Reichswehr, the German army, reduced by the Treaty of Versailles to 100,000 men, few in number, but very well trained. Hitler knows that to wage war, he needs generals, admirals, competent officers, strategists, and trained specialists. He's always promised to free the army of the straitjacket of Versailles and to restore its troop and weapon strength. But the generals want more, in particular to get rid of Röhm and his stormtroopers, who are in a position to supplant the army. Röhm is also harshly criticized for having delusions of grandeur. He steals the limelight from Hitler. Industrialists are worried by his declaration that the National Socialist Revolution is not over. Goebbels says he's a Bolshevik in disguise. They've been partners in crime for 15 years, but Hitler's decision is firm: to eliminate Röhm, under the pretext that he has planned a coup d'etat. Hitler chooses his executioners: Himmler, head of the SS; Heydrich, head of the Gestapo; Sepp Dietrich, a former butcher who heads the Führer's bodyguard. Between June 30 and July 2nd, 1934, a period that Hitler calls the Night of the Long Knives, the SS murders Röhm and other potential opponents and embarrassing witnesses of Hitler's past. With Röhm gone, the stormtroopers lose all their influence and are deployed only to keep order. The army is satisfied, as are the industrial barons, and Sepp Dietrich is promoted to SS General. When Leni Riefenstahl directs her next film, Triumph of the Will, on the Nazi Party Congress of 1934, only black SS uniforms are seen marching behind Himmler. Hitler is now alone at the top of the pyramid. A month after the Night of the Long Knives, the last president of the Republic, Marshal Hindenburg, dies at age 87. Democracy has been dead and buried for a long time. Totalitarianism continues its implacable march. Hitler becomes commander of the armed forces. His power is absolute. All the soldiers must swear an oath of loyalty to the Führer, our leader, and the leader of the German people, Adolf Hitler.
Adolf Hitler!
Hitler attends the Bayreuth Festival to enjoy the music of Wagner, his favorite composer. The composer's daughter-in-law, Winifred Wagner, who supported him during his difficult beginnings, welcomes him now as master of Germany. Hitler can now look back at how far he has come. He's achieved the dream of his youth. To incarnate Rienzi, his favorite Wagnerian hero, who sacrifices himself for his adoring people. Hitler will first appropriate the successes of the Weimar Republic, such as the famous autobahns, which will become showcases of the Nazi regime. Then, Hitler will strike by passing the Nuremberg race laws. He will burn synagogues to the ground in the Kristallnacht pogrom, prelude to the final solution. He'll violate the Treaty of Versailles by reoccupying the demilitarized zones of 1919. The weakness shown by the lack of reaction from France or England will lead Mussolini to draw closer to Hitler, allowing him to annex Austria, a step in what he calls his mission, to integrate all the German-speaking peoples into a greater Germany. He'll intervene in the bloody Spanish Civil War, sending his bombers to annihilate the population of Guernica, ensuring victory for Franco's fascists over the Spanish Republicans. He dreams of a great army, like Napoleon's. One he will lead to Moscow. All the while, proclaiming his desire for peace.
Wir wollen einst ein Reich sehen, und ihr müsst euch schon dafür erziehen. Wir wollen, dass dieses Volk einst gehorsam ist, und ihr müsst euch in den Gehorsam üben. Wir wollen, dass dieses Volk einst friedliebend und aber auch tapfer ist, und ihr müsst friedfertig sein.
When Germany is ready, Hitler, obstinate and ferocious, will drag it and the world with it into a long night, peopled by the ghosts of over 50 million dead.